This one comes in from Ross. This is a great question. Hi, Anthony. I'm a huge fan of the podcast. I particularly love the episodes specifically on training and was wondering if there's a few common things you've noticed that these coaches to the elite athletes all agree on and have as core guidelines for their athletes.
Yeah, that's a really cool question. And that's what probably the aspect of the podcast I love the most, because when I was getting started, I was kind of trying to shuffle around and find books to piece together training principles and philosophies. And then you're getting a lot of hearsay from guys in the car park. Someone to tell you, oh, I found this amazing session that's like a threshold session. That's totally gone now. You can, with a podcast like this, get access to Primoz Roglic's coach, and you can figure out exactly how Dan Lorang is coaching Primoz Roglic. It's absolutely insane. It blows my mind. So yeah, we've been lucky enough to kind of go deep on that training aspect and what makes riders faster, specifically time crunched riders, because that's what I try and focus on. So I'm thinking about like who have we had, like Dan Lorang and John Wakefield, both from Bora Hansgrove. We've had Stephen Seiler, who's just a legend in sports physiology. Dan Plews, who's coached Jan Frodeno and some of the best triathletes in the world. Joe Friel, who's just an absolute legend. Matt Bottrell, one of the best time trial coaches in the world. And if I think about commonalities, there's definitely a few that spring to mind. Firstly, it's the distribution of your hard training to your easy training. I think a lot of athletes, we'll call them, time crunched or age group athletes, people balancing, multiple stuff like a job, a family, by and large, they train too hard. All these great coaches agree we should be training easy most of the time. And that's hard to stomach when you don't have much available training time. Sarah, if you've 5 hours to train the week and then you look and you have 5 easy rides, it's like, oh, am I progressing at all? But they all agree on at least an 80-20 distribution of low intensity to high intensity training. Some of them even further, like 90-10.
That's kind of the thing that people do. We most often see people doing wrong, isn't it? That spread of the intensity.
Ride hard all the time.
Yeah, or ride kind of hard all the time. I certainly did at the beginning, kind of rolling around zone 3 all of the time. It just is not going to get you where you want to be.
Yeah. Another one which I thought was brilliant, and this was from John Wakefield, and it tied into a comment that Matej Mohoric made on the podcast. And Mohoric said it took him 10 years to realise that the purpose of training is to get faster. That seems like such a simple comment on a surface, but if you unpack it, it's actually not, because it's not about just getting green boxes on our training peaks. We're all kind of addicted to that. It's about the response we get to the training. So the training is the stimulus. The response is how we get better after the training. So John Wakefield from Bora Hansgrove has a test called a sub-maximum fatigue test that he gets his athletes to do every 7 to 10 days. The idea of this is, well, there's no point in doing a hard session if your body's not ready to absorb a hard session. So he tests your fatigue before the training session starts to make sure you're going to absorb that training session. So it's not just going out the door and going, oh, I have 2x20 threshold to do, I need to get them done. There's no point in getting them done if they're not going to make you faster on the back end. So his sub-maximum fatigue test, and you can go back and watch that episode with John Wakefield. It's up on the YouTube channel or search it on the podcast. But his protocol for that, it's a 3-minute effort at 85% of threshold. And during that, so that's threshold power, during that he's observing heart rate, and he's looking at other subjective measurements like the athlete's mood, their perceived exertion, their stress levels, their sleep quality, and even their weight. He breaks down the exact protocol for that sub-maximum fatigue test in the podcast. I thought that was brilliant as well. And another commonality, it's the reverse engineering of success. And we try to do this with the podcast a little bit. And some of us, if you're a high performer in maybe your job, you'll do this in your job. But they look at what the finishing line looks like. So if you take Dan Lorang and Bora Hansgrove, they want to win the Tour de France this year with Primoz Roglic. How likely or not that is, we could debate that maybe later on the podcast. But he looks at what are demands of the event, and then he breaks those down into its constituent parts, and he works on training those qualities throughout the training plan. So there's nothing random. Every training session he's doing today is calibrated for that end goal. So you've broke down what success looks like, figured out the constituent parts of success, and then started drip feeding them into your macro plan over the months and weeks before you get to the target event. I think there are 3 really key things that basically all those amazing coaches agree on.
So, yeah, I think that's absolutely brilliant. And
There's some gold there.
there's some gold there, like there really is. I know that I have a little bit of recency bias because I watched Dr. Lim quite recently, and that
Alan Lim.
Alan
Yeah,
Lim,
great guy.
oh my God, his podcast was absolutely amazing. And in the podcast, you actually asked him who was his favorite cyclist to coach, or the best person to coach. And he asked him what's this kind of thread that all those athletes have, you know, to make it very easy for a coach. And I'm pretty sure he said Mike Woods was, you know, the hardest worker, one of them. And the other thing that he said that made a successful athlete was that they actually have fun.
Yeah.
That they enjoy it, that they love it, that they're actually having fun. This isn't a slog.
Yeah, and you know what was brilliant in that as well, and actually that might even squeeze its way into something that everybody agrees on. You don't want to be the 10 out of 10. He said whenever he sees someone that's 10 out of 10, and when you think about 10 out of 10, that applies to so many different areas. You don't want to be 10 out of 10 with your nutrition. You don't want to be 10 out of 10 with your training, with your sleep. Because when he sees a 10 out of 10, what he actually observes is a 2 out of 10 waiting to happen. That nobody stays at 10 out of 10 level all the time. So a 10 out of 10 is just waiting to break. He said the most successful riders he's worked with are the likes of Mike Woods, where they're 8 out of 10, but over a massively long time period that's really sustainable. So that's another huge takeaway, that if you're building a training plan, I would start with, well, what's the amount of training stimulus that you will get done on your worst week? And let's start building a training plan from there.
Yeah, another thing that kind of works for me as well, since I've started working with a coach a couple of years ago, you're coaching me now, and I think you've noticed this too, is...
You need to answer me, yes, coach.
Yes, coach. Yes, sir. So at the beginning, we were saying I would, train 6 days a week. I'd do a double session on a Wednesday. And as your coach is watching the trends, we've realized that I always miss a day. So I can't train 6 days a week. Either I'm too tired, I'm too busy. So now we do 5 days a week. That's my 8 out of 10. That's my base. That's going to give me success. So kind of having a coach, if you're watching your trends and sticking to actually what works for you, and not, you're the guy that you ride in the club with on a Saturday. So I think that's really, really important too.
Yeah, Dr. David Lippman, another brilliant guest on the podcast, he said if you zoom out and you look at long-term trends or long-term outcomes, when you look back on someone's career, they're more defined by the height of their ceiling than they're more defined by the height of the floor than the height of the ceiling. So we're more defined by our worst weeks than we are our best weeks. So there's no point in going off to Lanzarote or Tenerife and doing a 40-hour week if you're doing the 2-hour week. You're better off working on getting that 2-hour week to a 6-hour week, and that becomes your base. If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video I know that you're absolutely going to love. Click over here and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.